This happened to my ex-best friend when she was in a dorm in a college a few years ago. She was with a few other girls, and the other girls were named Jasmine, Kyla, and Jennifer. They were really nice girls, and they were all really pleasant on the first day when they met each other at the school. Now, since my ex-best friend had to stay in the dorm, as for some reason it was like at least a couple hours away from her hometown, her parents were willing to pick her up when she didn't have school, like for break weeks and etc. So my ex-best friend was just chilling in her own room one day when someone came up and knocked on her dorm room door. Now she was done her orientation early, so she decided to go over to see who was knocking on the door. And surprisingly, there was this woman. This girl looked to be about her age, and she looked very friendly. Of course, my ex-best friend did notice this, but did not say anything about it. The girl that she was talking to actually had some bruises on her eyes and even a broken nose. She decided not to say nothing about it, thinking she might have got hurt or something. And this girl said, "Hi there, welcome to the college. My name is Lucy," she said. Lucy gave my ex-best friend a plate of cookies, and my ex-best friend said, "Oh, thank you so much, Lucy." And then she closed the door and enjoyed them. However, college was going really well until Lucy started doing some creepy things. Of course, when my ex-best friend came back from her first day of classes one day, she see Lucy staring at her through her window that was not far from one of the college campgrounds, or at least this case, the campus on the field. She saw Lucy staring at her in the mirror and wondered why Lucy was staring. So, with that being said, my ex-best friend decided to close the blinds and thinking she might have been creepy. But this was becoming more weird as Lucy would always stand outside or anywhere near my ex-best friend's dorm room. This continued on for about at least a few days. But however, one day, my ex-best friend didn't have classes as they were canceled, so she was doing her usual thing, when all of a sudden she had heard a knock on the door, and surprisingly enough, it was Lucy. She said, "Oh, hi there." Lucy just stared at my ex-best friend. Unsettling smile began to grow on her, and this is when my friend actually she looked at it, and this is when my ex-best friend knew she had to say something. She looked at her, and she said, "Hey, look, I know you're friendly and all that, but could you stop staring at me or even knocking at my door all the time?" Lucy just frowned as soon as my ex-best friend slammed the door shut on her. Though that was actually might have been the best thing to do. However, and the next day later, when my ex-best friend came back from classes, she found out that the dorm room was completely trashed. It actually looked like it. Well, not really exactly. There was only a few kitchen appliances and stuff thrown down, and Lucy was staring green at the window. It was Lucy who broke in, but my ex-best friend wondered why she did it. "Look, I'm gonna call the security. You need to leave now," my ex-best friend said, but that's when Lucy charged at her and tried to beat the living crap out of my best friend. However, my ex-best friend was able to call the cops as the security guards wrestled Lucy off of her. After some heated discussion, my ex-best friend got a restraining order on Lucy, and Lucy was expelled from the college campus, and she never has returned since then. That was the only incident that was really freaky that my ex-best friend had to experience, was a neighbor in college that was not friendly. When I was a kid, sometime maybe around the early 2000s, I was about maybe 4 or 5 years old. There was this one place that we used to live in our hometown, that we used to live on a street that was only a couple minutes away from the street where I lived at. Now, to be completely honest, this was actually the freakiest encounter my family's ever seen. There was this one house that was at the end of the driveway. Well, not driveway, but the end of the street that we used to live on. It was a pretty nice little area. It was actually pretty interesting. The house that was there was basically looked vacant on the outside. We're thinking that maybe it was just because it was an old house, which our house was decently aged. It looked like maybe it was like maybe 20 or something years old or something like that. But with that being said, we didn't really do too much about it because it was a pretty interesting area. And in other words, we just sat there and just looked at it as if it was just an old house. So, with that being said, there was someone that we never seen before living there. It looked like there was a woman and a man living together. My mom and I decided to go and greet them and welcome them to the neighborhood. So we walked up to their house one day. We welcomed them with some food and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They seemed rather friendly and they were pretty pleased to see us. My mom explained to them that we lived not far from where they lived, and they said, "Oh, that's interesting. We knew a few people that used to live there." Then we just smiled and just kept going. Almost every day when I get off the bus from school, I would wave to them and even go to the house sometimes with my mom. And once in a while, they would let me play with their dog in the backyard. The dog in the backyard was a German Shepherd, and his name was Max, and Max was a really cute, friendly dog. Now, with that being said, this visit continued almost every day, until one day, I walked over there with my mom, and we realized that they weren't there. There was nobody at the house, even though we knocked on the door, but their car was in the driveway. What was going on was my question. I didn't even see who or what was in there, but it looked as if no one had bothered to be in that house for a vacant long period of time. Now, with that being said, my mom and I were curious, so we went to knock on the door again, but this time there was no response. I was looking through one of the doors, thinking that there could have been somebody in there, but unfortunately, I couldn't see anybody. I called out if anyone was in there, but only there was no one there still. And we called out, "Hey, who's there?" But there was nobody in the house. But that continued, and we never bothered there again. But however, I remember one day my dad got me off the bus as he was home early, and he said that my mom had to take care of something. A couple years went by, and I was about, 16 or 17, when the conversation was brought up by my mom. My mom said that the people that had been living in the house were legally living there, as that house had been vacant for at least 2 years. It was due for a renovation, but unfortunately the couple were basically kidnapping the dog, and they were kidnapping dogs and giving them lack of food and mistreat them. So with that said, the dog survived and he was back with his owner, and my mom and I were disgusted with these people's behavior, and we really hope we don't see them again. This took place in the winter time around 2016, and this is when one of our new neighbors had moved into the street where I used to live. Now, the neighbor at the time was a pretty interesting person, and he was really nice. Now, this happened at least a few days before Christmas, and this was around the time where things started to get a lot crazy. People doing their last minute Christmas shopping before the holidays, and etc. So I could definitely say that it's really something that we've been obviously really wanting to know is why it keeps going on. However, though, one day my dad and I were just going to see the mall to see Santa with my brother, as it was Christmas Eve, and it's a tradition we do every year. The neighbor would be outside, smiling and saying hello and nice stuff. However, though, this is when things got really weird. By the time my dad and my mom, my brother and I got home, we ended up seeing that there was somebody outside of our house. He looked like he had a knife, and my dad was pretty strong, and this guy seemed to be short, so my dad said he could take him on even if he could. Now, this guy ended up looking at my dad, and my dad got out of the truck, yelling and screaming at the dude, saying, "Get the hell out of my property! I'm going to call the cops on ya!" He threatened the neighbor, and the neighbor ran back to his house. My dad and my dad escorted me and my brother into the house, and we did that. And my mom exactly knew what was going on, but didn't want to tell us. We waited inside the house, which seemed to be a really long time. But with that being said, we waited for a while, but eventually we get a response. Of course, my dad explained that the neighbor who was there was actually wanting to break in our house, and my mom was wrapping presents. But thankfully, though, this guy didn't hurt my dad or anything. But when the police arrived, the man was not in our property, but they went to the house where we knew he was at, and that's where he was arrested. He had a history of breaking into houses and even murdering people. It went as far as to kidnapping teenagers. Thankfully, though, he was arrested, and that house has been cleaned out since. And since then, I never saw him again. But I sure hope I don't ever see him anymore. This happened to my granddad from my mom's side before he passed away in 2016. And this happened sometime to him in 2015. It was around shortly after Christmas, and things were going really well for him. Before he was sick, he was with his dog Wilson, and they were just chilling and just doing their own thing in their little trailer park in a little area that they lived in. Now, my granddad was just doing his usual thing, which would be drinking beer, watching TV, smoke, and etc. Now, one day there was a neighbor that my granddad never saw before, and she looked really friendly. She looked about maybe in her 50s, and she said that her husband had sadly died, and she ended up having to move into something more affordable. And that, like the trailer park, she said, was the only thing she could afford, as she was in danger of losing her job, as the job company she was going at was starting to run out of business. Now, my granddad doesn't remember what company she was working for, but they were running out of business, and my granddad couldn't remember the name at the time. Now, with that said, there was a new neighbor, and her name was Celia, and Celia seemed to be a very nice woman. She would offer my granddad to cut the lawn and even sometimes clean the house, as she usually did that on her free time, and my granddad paid her whenever he could. Even though it wasn't really necessary for him to pay Celia, but Celia seemed friendly enough, so my granddad didn't see any issues with that. However, this is when things started to get really strange. One day, Celia was walking around my granddad's trailer park property. He wondered why, but he thought maybe she was just looking for something. But however, though, it wasn't clear that she wasn't looking for something. Something strange was actually going on, and this is when things got really messed up. Celia was staring at my granddad's place not far from where he was at, and he wondered why she was staring at him. Thinking maybe it was just some hoax or something, he ignored it. But this is when it got really messed up. Celia was walking around the place, and unfortunately she ended up looking up to see that there was somebody outside near his door. His dog Wilson started barking angrily, and by the time Granddad got up, the woman was already gone, and wondered why Celia was around the place. He went to bed and never heard any weird noises since. However, though, when my granddad woke up the next morning, he walked over to see Celia. Of course, she was in her car. He asked Celia on why she was walking around the trailer area, and she said that she was looking for her dog, but she managed to find him. And my granddad asked, "Why didn't you come and get me? I could have easily helped you." Celia looked and said, I was thinking you were asleep or something, and I didn't want to wake you," Celia said. But my granddad started to find his suspicions about Celia. Now, one day, as Granddad was sleeping, he heard Wilson was about to go to bed. Of course, this is when Wilson started barking angrily and aggressively. this is when Granddad got up to see who or what was barking. And as soon as he did, he saw Celia carrying what seemed to be a crowbar and started banging on the door so hard that he thought he could break down the door. My granddad got very scared and ended up calling the police. And as soon as he got on the phone and called the police, Celia began crying and saying, Don't call the police. I just lost my mind. I'm sorry," she said. But as soon as the police sirens went off, though, Celia took her crowbar and ran off into the distance. Of course, when the police knocked on my granddad's door, my granddad showed them Celia's trailer, and he ended up explaining the best he could. The police searched around the area for Celia, but unfortunately she was already gone. The snowstorm was starting to get bad at the time, so my granddad was wondering why was Celia there. If it weren't for his dog Wilson, Celia could have broken in and probably have killed him. The police said they couldn't find Celia, and ever before my granddad died, he never saw Celia again. But that trailer park had been abandoned by Celia, but someone else had bought it, and of course, Celia was never seen again. And I just hope it stayed that way. But before Granddad died, he really hoped that Celia had never returned to that place again.